We've had a phenomenal history, and to think, and I know when you're young, 100 years is huge. As you get older, you realize it's not so huge.
Dede Terns-Thorpe is the historian for the town of Hunter, referred to locally as the Mountaintop, and comprising the villages of Hunter and Tannersville, and the hamlets of Edgewood, Elka Park, Lanesville, and Platte Clove, plus the historic private communities, Onteora Park, Twilight Park, and Elka Park. Dede's passionate about the history of this place, and she's got her own history here too, which is mostly what we talked about when we met at Tannersville's Mountaintop Library just about a month ago. Dede lived her first 10 years in New York City. Her dad was a firefighter there, but her family goes back generations, and she considers herself a Catskills native.
Both my parents were from here. My parents, my mom's family owned the forest inn in Elka Park, which used to be the Poggenberg Casino, which was part of the park. So we were 10 when we moved up here. My dad was a New York City fireman. So when he retired in 1956, 57, we moved up here. We came up in the summers every summer. So my heart was always here. I always felt like a true local. Yeah. So I would say we were settled in 1957. I know I went into the 6th grade because all the kids at school used to say, you were so lucky you missed Frances Curran, the teacher in the 5th grade, who was my aunt, which I was lucky. So
Tough teacher.
Tough teacher. Yeah.
Should I add things?
That's when Dede's husband, Ed Thorpe, jumped in, recounting just how tough Ms. Curran was, joking, maybe, that he still has a mark from where she banged his head against the blackboard. Ed didn't want to be interviewed at first, but he kept jumping in with stories, so we mic'd him up and convinced him, without too much arm twisting, to join the conversation.
So you want me to sing now?
Yeah. How about a duet?
Okay, you don't want to do that.
No, I don't think so.
Let's just backtrack a little bit, Ed. When were you born and in what town?
Well, the capital of New York State, Haines Falls. This was back in 1937. September 5th, if you want to get me something for my birthday.
And the capital, why?
Yeah.
In your world?
In my world, yeah. Born and raised up here, always been a local woodchuck, and kind of proud of it, I guess. I moved almost about 100 yards from my home in the cabbage patch to my other home in the cabbage patch. And
Cabbage Patch is the name of our street.
It's across from Stewart's in Haines Falls there. That's the cabbage patch.
Just past Cabbage Patch, going east, is a little building. It used to be called Traveler's Rest, and it was a little coffee shop. And his mom ran that for years. Yeah.
It was the social center of Haines Falls for a long, long time.
Pre-Stewart's.
Yeah, but it used to be Friday night was wrestling and Saturday night was boxing, or the other way around. And Traveler's Rest had the first TV. It was about that big, with a big magnifying glass in front of it. And the only place you could see real good was directly in front of it. If you were off to the side, it was just a blur. But and the place would fill up. They'd line up chairs like a movie theater, and everybody in town would come to the boxing and the wrestling.
You told me that all the kids used to have to
the kids weren't allowed up front. They had to go to the back, and the smoke would be so thick all you could see over there was a glow in the dark. You couldn't see the actual television. There was good times back then. There really was. And then my mother worked for the Earl Schumacher and Eddie Hoyt, who owned it, and she ended up buying it from them.
Ed always used the expression that he grew up in Haines Falls and he was really poor, but he didn't know he was poor because everybody at Haines Falls was poor.
Nobody told us. Well, but it really wasn't that bad. And my father was a game warden, so we had deer meat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You did. That's what you did. Times were a little tough back then.
It seems these days that there's a lot of restaurants and gift shops and things like that, but it's still hard to get groceries, and pharmacies are few and far between, that kind of thing. Was it more accessible back then?
It was. It was a lot more stable. We had a Simon's department store, which doesn't, it was only where Oscar's Mexican restaurant is, good Mexican restaurant, but it carried everything, carried socks and underwear and, and work pants and work shirts. And we had meat markets. We had lots of little grocery stores. We had the A&P. We had the Rexall pharmacy for years. We never thought we'd lose the Rexall. You lived your life here. You really didn't have to go off the mountain as much.
How many people in your class do you know, or you have an idea?
I should know because it's for 60 years. 60 years this year. Oh, my God. Can you believe that?
Well, at least in my school district, which is Onteora, there's a real retraction of students. So there's consolidation and concerns about keeping everything going. Has the population grown or shrunk for school age?
No, it's shrunk.
Shrunk here too.
And it's funny though. Some classrooms are, there's 30 kids in them. We probably had close to 30. I'm guessing around that. And then there's other times when their classes are very small. So it depends. But our enrollment is down quite a bit.
And that's because of second homeowners?
Second homeowners has a lot to do with it. The fact that we really have no industry up here has always played a big impact on the kids. And now the housing situation has gotten so that it's, long-term rentals are almost impossible to afford. I don't know how people are doing what, I know I have friends that are paying $1,700, $1,800 a month plus utilities. You have to be making a pretty good salary to cover that.
What kind of industry, if any, was available when you were younger? Or was it still tourism-based, or were there more?
It was definitely tourism-based. Hunter Mountain had just opened. Hunter Mountain opened in like 59, 60 when they really got established. So, and they opened truly to they wanted to bring winter work to the mountaintop. Yeah.
And this was a family that was already involved in excavating and
Slutsky family.
Yeah, so
good family. Yeah.
They took those skills and created a ski area.
They did. And Orville Slutsky was he was the one that was in the lodge most often, and he was just a hardworking guy. He'd empty the garbage pail if it was full, or do whatever he had to do. Yeah.
So one of your first jobs here was obviously after sixth grade, waitressing.
Yes.
I understand that the restaurant, or maybe more so the bar scene here, was really hopping back then. Can you tell me about that?
60s, 70s, probably the 80s also, maybe into the 90s, but we had a lot of bars on the mountaintop, a tremendous amount. I couldn't even tell you all of them, and they were all busy. We had a ski crowd, but we also had just a party crowd, and they would come up in vehicles. The ski rentals were huge. Everyone was renting out their houses. Restaurants were hopping. Everything was hopping. It was a busy, and my husband was the town judge, so I could tell you that from that end, it was pretty busy. So lots of just kids, young people having fun,
As a barkeep and town judge, Ed experienced the Hunter bar scene from a couple of unique perspectives.
Every other building was a bar, and it was that kind of a weekend. Every weekend, you were called out for midnight arraignments for the drunks, and we had a lot of them back then. And that was, they called you out every weekend, and it was busy.
So you were serving drinks, and then you'd head over to the courthouse for the arraignments.
They call you out later. You might have been the guy that gave them the booze. And then arraigned them later on. You look familiar. Why should I? Yeah, it was your bartender. It was quite a job because of how busy you were, and some of the stuff that you get to see sitting behind that bench. Of course, I was probably guiltier than most of the ones in front of me, but it was something. That was good, yeah. And most of the skiers, they didn't even know where Hunter Mountain was. The bar rooms would stop them before they ever got to Hunter Mountain. They never even made it there, most of them. And I was lucky enough to be the weekend bartender at Pete's Place. It was a thriving bar, and it was always busy, and the judge was busy back in those days because they called you out for immediate arraignments. Yeah, and most of them did not. They usually say, "Hey, student didn't know what you were talking about anyway." So
You had to catch them before they left town, right?
Yeah, that was about what it amounted to. But it was I don't know. Back in the heyday, it was a lot of fun. And then, like I said, then I attended bar at Hunter Village Inn, which was another. There was O'Shea's and the Hunter Village Inn competed for the most drinkers in the town of Hunter, and there was a lot of them back then. But it was interesting back then, how busy it was up here. Like you couldn't even pull out in the street on like a Saturday night because of the traffic, and plus on foot in the village of Hunter there was like 4 or 5 bars, and it was like Midtown Manhattan on a Saturday night with groups of skiers roaming the streets, and yeah.
What happened to those crowds?
I don't know.
The bars closed.
Things changed, I guess. And
A lot of day trippers today. But,
yeah.
I don't know whether money got in the way or, the bar scene did quiet down.
What came first, the closure of some of those bars or the crowds dissipating?
Well, the closure of the bars made the crowds disappear.
And was there too many bars? Was there too much going on?
Well,
it was just,
there started to be some trouble about it. People were writing letters to the editors, and the local people. They were unhappy with the way things were going up here. It was too many bars. And then eventually the DWI laws got stricter, and and people just shied away from drink. Even today, I mean, you're really careful when you go out and you have a few drinks. You can't afford to today. So
I was like the worst bartender. So they put me as far back in the bars as you could get, and that was where all the locals and the other bartenders and stuff like that that's where they came, was to my station way at the back end of the bar. And I would ring up more on a Saturday night than with the skiers up in the front big bars. I would ring up more than those guys did. And I could go from behind the bar at the Hunter Village Inn to the courthouse and arraign the drunks that I'd just been serving whiskey to. So,
A little conflict of interest there?
no, not really. No. Yeah.
In Ed's younger years, that'd be prior to serving and arraigning Hunter's heaviest drinkers, Ed made money caretaking some of the historic homes in the mountaintop's historic parks.
you always said the parks gave a lot of business to you when you were younger.
And
shoveling the roofs off because nobody hardly stayed during the winter.
Yeah, that was it. Actually, they didn't plow the roads like Twilight Park. Not Onteora so much, but Twilight. All these old houses, the snow was 2 or 3 feet deep on the roofs. And what you did, you went and shoveled the roofs off so they didn't cave in. Well, luckily, sometimes you got there in time, sometimes you didn't. And the porch roofs, and then you'd shovel the snow off and collapse their porch roofs from the higher roof, and then in the springtime, then you got to work to rebuild the porch. So it was, yeah.
So there's 3 big parks up here, kind of cottage communities. So that's Elka Park, Twilight Park, Onteora Park.
Yes.
They started back in the
1880s.
When you were young and shoveling snow off the roofs, what kind of people were living up there then? How's that changed to now?
There was nobody here in the wintertime. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was just a few locals, and that was it. And the park people only came once summer started. Yeah, and they came just strictly for the summer.
A lot of the same families as today?
Oh, yeah. They go all the way back. Onteora and Twilight, both of them go way, way back.
There were 2 other parks, though. There was Santa Cruz Park and Sunset Park, and they were both around, too.
Yeah, we always called it all Twilight, but it wasn't.
No.
Yeah, Dede's right.
Yeah.
Same area as Twilight, those 2?
Close by. Santa Cruz was actually just southeast of Twilight, and then Sunset was over just a little further.
Yeah.
So you grew up, Dede, in Elka Park, but not in the club.
Right, but right near the club.
What was the relationship between the clubs and the outside community? Was there interaction, or
Well,
did they
there
keep to
was,
themselves?
but it was very limited, especially back then. And probably in 1900 it was much more limited from what you read, but it's come a long ways to what it is today. Today it's a much more relaxed atmosphere. I don't know if the big money is still the same as it was, but I know Elka Park, we grew up very close, so I did a lot of babysitting up there. It was a pretty cool place to work. I did a lot of waitressing in the restaurant up there. And Elka Park was going to originally have 80 homes in it, and for whatever reason they kept it to the same original 22. I think they have. Twilight has definitely a lot more, and Onteora probably both around 100.
Yeah.
Did they all have their own restaurants?
Twilight Park actually had a couple hotels in it. It had Santa Cruz and Legend Inn and Twilight Inn. Onteora had a clubhouse. Basically, that was that.
Yeah, you could get meals there, like at the clubhouse in Onteora.
Yes.
And the same way in Twilight. A lot of the people, they just ate there, right? Had their meals there when it first started, yeah.
When Twilight was built, the homes were built without kitchens because they felt that the women should rest, should get to relax, which was quite unique back in the 1800s. But I have to tell you that I did a big study this summer. I did it with another woman that lives in Twilight, Joanne Ainsworth, and it was on the Twilight Inn fire. So we had pretty wicked fires back up here back then. Smoking laws were very relaxed. A lot of them had balloon-framed construction, so there was no stoppage for the fire when it started.
Tell a little more about that Twilight Inn fire.
Twilight Inn fire happened in 1926, and it was 22 people died in it. It was probably the worst. It's still the worst, I believe, Greene County fire. But it was an awful fire. It started at 1 o'clock in the morning, and a young man, Carl Stryker, I've always been fascinated with this young man. He was only in his early 20s. He worked at Twilight Inn for just 10 days when he was the night watchman. He discovered the fire. There had been a party the night before for the help, but they were all sound asleep. They all slept on the third floor. Carl Stryker was, again, the night watchman, and he was responsible he ran in and out and probably saved 10 or 12 people. There were a number of locals that showed up, but 22 people died. They were jumping out windows, and it was terrible. And the only thing the fire company could really do was protect the other homes, because the other homes were so close by.
If you go to the Hayes Falls Cemetery now, there's a big monument and stone there with all the names of the people that died in that fire.
And again, it was before they did much with fire escapes, and it was just dramatic.
Five decades later, Dede would take a job as Hunter Mountain's fire tower observer. Just one of many jobs she'd pursue on the mountaintop over the years, including her very favorite job, which, well, you're just going to have to stay tuned. All that and more right after this.
Catscast is sponsored by Hanford Mills Museum. Explore the power of the past and learn about the ingenuity of the historic milling industry. Watch the water wheel bring a working sawmill to life. Bring a picnic to enjoy by the mill pond. For more information about scheduling a tour or about their 2024 exploration days, visit hanfordmills.org. This episode is proudly sponsored by Ulster Savings Bank. Stop in and meet the friendly staff at their Phoenicia and Woodstock locations. Call 866-440-0391 or visit them at ulstersavings.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Back at the Mountaintop Library with Hunter town historian Dede Terns-Thorpe and husband Ed Thorpe, I asked about Dede's job as Hunter Mountain Fire Tower Observer in the 1970s.
When I got that job, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea I was going to be traveling for 4 miles of a dirt road in a Jeep because I'd only been to one fire tower in my life, and that was I drove my car up to it. So it was quite an experience. But I'll tell you one thing about the fire tower. It's something that every child that lives on the mountaintop should see, because you really don't appreciate where you live until you stand at the very top and you look down at it.
Well, tell them what your dad said when they offered. She said, I don't know anything about fire towers or anything like that.
Dad
Her
always
father
said, just say you could do it,
Just say
and
that
I'll
was
teach
it.
you. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
how you got the job, right? Yeah.
But it was, females weren't, that type of job. So it was quite an experience. My Jeep was broken into by some kids when the Slutskys used to let me park my Jeep down there, so I didn't have to have it on the road. And some kids broke into it one night and ripped all the wires out, and Orville found out about it and gave me his Jeep to use for the rest of the summer. And that's how I would describe living on mountaintop, is that people,
Things like that.
especially back then, everybody knew everybody, so they were always coming around to help. But anyway, that was quite the job. It was quite an experience for me.
Dede, how old were you when you got that job?
I was young. I was 23.
And you were up there all by yourself.
I was up there by myself. Yeah, I really, it was a true experience in many ways.
If you're detecting some ambivalence in that phrase, well, remember, these were the rowdy bar days on the mountaintop, and that rough atmosphere wasn't contained to the bars themselves. There were some unsavory characters sharing mountain space with young Dede.
Were you ever concerned with the types of people who were just kind of hanging on the mountain?
Yeah, because, there were the real true hikers, there were the dedicated people, the outside people, and then there were the partiers, and they would carry up full 12 packs of beer and leave the empties, and they were just up there to party. It was just, yes, I was concerned for my safety back then. There were times, most of the time I wasn't. When I first got the job, I have to tell you this, I could not make it all the way up to the top of the fire tower. It's 60 feet tall, and it was I'd never been above 20 feet in my life, I don't think. But eventually, within about a week, I was cleaning the windows.
But when she takes me up there, and the fire tower actually blows back and forth in the wind. It moves. It's a steel tower, but it still moves. And you can still see my fingerprints in the handrail up there where I'm going, and she's running around going, oh, this is this over there, or something like that. And the tower's going back and forth, and she's running around, oh, that's Lanesville. Oh, quite a while ago. But
it was a good job in a lot of ways, though. Yeah.
What was your responsibility up there, and how many hours a day would you be up there?
Well, you went up every day, and you were there for your full 8 hours, and it took you about, I don't know, I'm trying to guess, it probably was like 40 minutes, 45 minutes to get up there. You did a lot of brush cutting because you had to keep the telephone lines clear. So that was pretty much your day. You kept the lean-tos, you checked on the lean-tos, but pretty much you were responsible for cutting the brush under the telephone lines, which went the entire way, so.
And then were you actively looking for fires?
Oh, yeah, you would get on the radio whenever, especially on the weekends.
If you spotted smoke, you'd call it in.
And if the plane saw smoke, then you would be their only communication, because sometimes they couldn't reach the other towers.
How come we don't need them anymore?
There seems to be more attention to fire safety. I think the rangers are out there constantly now. I just think there's a lot of precautions taken today that they weren't necessarily taken back then. Automobiles and vehicles are in better shape. And there was, a lot of smokers, cigarettes get thrown. And before all that, you had the railroads going through, which caused a lot of the fires. So, but I think we've become much more conscious today.
Well, they had guys that walked the railroad, right?
Fire watchers.
Fire watchers, they call them, because they were setting so many.
The railroad would throw sparks? Is that how that worked?
It would throw sparks, yep. Yeah.
After Hunter Fire Tower, you worked at Devil's Tombstone, which is that Lanesville?
That's Lanesville. It's on Route 214, and it was a wonderful job. It was a great outdoor experience for me.
Caretaker.
Yeah.
So you were there.
Superintendent. You slept there. You lived there for 7 days a week. You were there the whole. And back then, it was open from pre-Memorial Day right through like Veterans Day. It was open the entire year. Now it's pretty limited to when it's opened. That's when my father really told me, if they ask you anything, just say yes, because that first summer I was there was the first year of the German Alps Festival. And the caretaker at North Lake had quit. So they asked me to fill the summer up in there, and my dad said, because I knew I couldn't do it, and my father said, yes, you can, just do it. Do you know how to do it, run a backhoe? Sure, no problem at all. But anyway, we got through it, and but then I went back to Devil's Tombstone. I was very happy to be there.
And during the months when the campground was closed, Dede went back to Hunter Mountain, but in a different capacity.
I got the job as a nurse at Hunter Mountain Ski Bowl, learned a lot about first aid and skiing, got to ski for free. So what I would do was worked winter at Hunter Mountain Ski Bowl and then Devil's Tombstone the rest of the year. So it really worked out beautifully, especially when you had a young child. So it worked out well. And I learned a lot about accidents and skiing, and, most accidents happen because people ski over their ability, or improper equipment fitted, and, so.
Hunter Mountain was, you mentioned the festivals. It was a pretty hopping place.
The festivals were huge. Back then, they used to have the German Alps Festival. I can't even remember, but it seems like it was like 2 weeks long, or possibly 3 weeks. They had the Irish Festival and the Polka Festival and the Country Western Festival. And yeah, I was the nurse in the first aid room for their festivals. And it was some pretty good drinking going on there. So you always had some action going on in the first aid room.
And then another job opportunity, encouraged again by Dede's dad, ended up being a favorite.
Well, my father wanted me to take the test for the Postal Service, and I really took it just to humor him, because that's what you do when you're young. And it was the best job I ever had. It was, I carried mail for Catskill on foot for 10 years. Then I became a postmaster because I kept thinking, what's it going to be like when I'm, a certain age? And so I became a postmaster, and I was fortunate to work in Haines Falls, then Port Ewan, Wyndham, and then I retired from Tannersville.
What was so great about delivering mail?
Well, delivering it on foot was great. We do Meals on Wheels now, and it's the same thing with that. There's certain people that that you're the only people that they see the whole day. Delivering mail was great because, I don't know, you were outside, you were your own boss, nobody bothered you, miserable days, you just dealt with them because they were going to pass too. The shortest route in Catskill was 8.5 miles, and the longest was 12.5. I'd never walked a mile in my life before I got that job, so it was quite an experience.
That phrase, come rain, come sleet, come hail, was it?
Only one day where we pulled it off the mail route, one day in all those years, and it was because it was a horrible blizzard. Oh my God! And the worst part was, you were only delivering circulars because the trucks couldn't make it up here with the mail. So they came in and got us. It was 1:00 in the afternoon. I'll never forget it.
Dede, tell me a little bit about your dad. It seemed like he encouraged you to take all these jobs. What was his background?
My dad, he was one of 7 kids. He grew up in Platte Clove for a number of years and then moved to Haines Falls. He was a really smart, self-educated person. Became a New York City fireman, spent 20-some years there. Came back up here, was a union carpenter. He was the commissioner of elections for Greene County. Spent many years on our school board. He was just self-educated. That's what I would say about my dad. Great dad, great father. Always pushed us to be the best we could be. But he was the one that had me take the post office exam and just say you can do whatever somebody asked you if you could do it. And he was quite my biggest admirer, largest admirer. Yeah. But I've been very fortunate. I've had great jobs, and when Daryl Legg was responsible for asking me to take over from Justine Hummel, she was a good friend of mine, as town historian, and that is scratched off my bucket list.
You said in your notes to me, grand finale, town of Hunter
Grand finale,
historian.
yes, it is.
I mean, it seems like you've really enjoyed a lot of different work experiences throughout your life.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I have really been lucky, and most of them have been right up here on the mountaintop or in Greene County.
Town historian's the capstone.
Town historian is the capstone. We've had a phenomenal history, and to think, and I know when you're young, 100 years is huge. As you get older, you realize it's not so huge.
Now, as town historian, you're able to bring at least 70 plus years of your own experience into that knowledge. How do you reach back beyond that? Has immersing yourself in the history been a lifelong pursuit?
It always has been. I've always been a local history buff. Now it's intensified, but I've always been a local history buff. Yeah.
How long have you been a Hunter historian?
Actually, Daryl asked me to take over in November of 2012 to find out that the bicentennial was in February of 2013. So, so it's been a ride. The one thing that, and I'd like people to help me with this, is I'm working on a map of the town of Hunter to place the many hotels that we had. That's probably the most prevalent question I get today is, my grandparents used to stay at a hotel back in the 1920s. It was in Tannersville or Hunter or whatever. But so I'm putting 911 addresses, street addresses, on the map. There were many hotels in Platte Clove, Elka Park. Lanesville had numerous. I think they could accommodate up to 400 people at one point. So that would be my gift to the town.
And you need help.
Well, I need people's input as far as where places were, and like I'm pretty good with Tannersville and Elka Park. Johnny Farrell, the retired town road supervisor, helped me out with Platte Clove because he knows it like the back of his hand. But I need some help with Hunter, and Beecher Smith is helping me over in Lanesville and Marie Lane. So, yep.
So, what do you recommend if people want to know more about the history of this area?
Well, there's a lot of local good little books about history in the area. And we have a lot of historians. There's a lot of websites out there. And anyone that has any questions, please feel free to just email thehunterhistorian@gmail.com or call the townhouse. And I'd be more than happy to help you go into the right direction.
Read Dede's weekly local history column in The Mountain Eagle. And check out her new book, Tidbits of the Town of Hunter, wherever books are sold, such as
Briars and Brambles Books, the go-to independent book and gift store in the Catskills. Located in Windham, New York, right next to the pharmacy, just steps away from the Windham Path. Open daily. For more information, visit briarsandbramblesbooks.com or call 518-750-8599.
Catscast, the Catskills podcast, is a production of Silver Hollow Audio. If you'd like to help us reach more ears in the Catskills, please take a moment to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It only takes a few minutes, and we really appreciate the feedback. Follow us on Instagram @Catscast and sign up for our newsletter at catscast.com. I'm Brett Barry. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Catscast is supported by a generous grant from the Nicholas J. Juriad Family Foundation and by listeners like you. If you'd like to make a donation, you can do so at catscast.com. Thank you.